Good evening. It's now 7:07, an hour after we should have started our meeting, and I do apologize because it was technical difficulties this evening. We'll try to remedy that. We are moving from WebEx to Zoom, and a lot of us are not that familiar with what's going on. Having said that, this is Monday, June 13th. It is 7:07. This is the Ways and Means Subcommittee of the Greenfield City Council. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This meeting is being recorded by the Ways and Means Committee. If any other persons present are doing the same, you must notify the chairperson at this time. In accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20G, quote, no person shall address a meeting of a public body without permission of the chair, and all persons shall, at the request of the chair, be silent. No person shall disrupt the proceedings of a meeting of a public body. If, after clear warning from the chair, a person continues to disrupt the proceedings, the chair may order the person to withdraw from the meeting. And if the person does not withdraw, the chair may authorize a constable or other officer to remove the person from the meeting. We'll have a roll call. Councilor DeSorger.
I'm here.
Councilor Healy.
Here.
Councilor Toronzo. And Councilor Forgy. We have a quorum. Next on our agenda is the approval of minutes. There's quite a lot of them. I know that there were different people that could attend on and off. If you want to address these minutes this evening, we can. If you think it would be better for us to address them at a different time when we have, more people, because I think if you didn't attend, you have to abstain from the vote. So I'm going to suggest that we just postpone the acceptance of those meetings until we have a full body. Okay, we're going to move on. We have public hearing. And now we are down to our business, which are motions. The first motion this evening that's going to need a recommendation going out to Ways and Means, out to the council chairs, is the approval of the Community Preservation Committee Fiscal Year 2023 budget. It's on page 11 on our agenda. And this agenda has a lot of pages to it. So is there discussion on this? Does everybody understand what we're doing and why we're doing it? And there was a lot of paperwork. I think it was very well presented. It's actually exciting because this is the first time that community preservation has had an agenda and a request has been on our agenda and a request for their budget funding. So having said that, if anybody has anything to say, and I may not be able to see all of you. I'm going through minutes like crazy here. So let me just, okay.
I'm glad they're able to get started on it. Do you want us just to speak out where you can't see our hands, Councilor Forgy?
I can see. Yes, it's okay. Go ahead, Ginny. That's fine. Thank you.
I'm glad that they're able to get started on this. They're using, they're not talking about whatever. They're not planning on using, it doesn't look like the match from the state yet, because that actually can vary from year to year. But I think that was it was great how they, listed out what the matches have been, and we can see that it changes annually, but we do know what's coming our way, and I'm glad that they were able to get started with that. So I would say yes.
Yes, I would. I also am very excited to see this as part of our agenda. Mm-hmm. I see the housing director, Mr. Guarino has got a hand up. If that's okay with counselors, I'd like to recognize him. Okay. Go ahead, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, I think the council subcommittee is well aware of the committee's been in process now for about 7 months or 8 months, maybe a little more, doing a lot of the work that is required both by statute and regulation under the Community Preservation Act. Put together a plan, a community preservation plan, and I want to just note that Kristen LaPlante has been really the workhorse of the committee and has done an absolutely tremendous job on our behalf. The committee meets monthly, and the attendance has been pretty good, except for by the vice chair. He's missed a couple of meetings, kind of in the middle. But they've worked hard. They've set up their own working groups to put together different parts of the plan. And as we move forward with public hearing and application process over the next several months into the fall, and then hopefully funding for the next year, we won't have any funding round this year. I think that the excitement that can be derived from this by groups that wouldn't normally come to the city for funding, maybe small neighborhood projects or housing projects, certainly as time goes on, but things that neighborhoods can do and maybe get together and maybe do some different types of things other than that could come from a general appropriation from the council. So if Christian or the members here have any questions on the mechanics, Christian certainly would be the one to answer.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Christian, very much. I just want to recognize your work and your effort to get this up and running. It is exciting.
I agree. It is very exciting, and I'm glad I've been able to be involved in the startup of it.
Thank you very much. Liz, did you have something you wanted to add, or you all set?
I'm reading through this, and I'm not sure you should be appropriating the budgeted reserves, but everything else I'm okay with, because an appropriation goes on the recap. And
okay, here we go again.
I know. Everything else I'm fine with, and if it hits, it's going to go to the budgeted reserves. Other than what is indicated here for open space, historic resources, and community housing. That's just my thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you. There's just, I'm so sorry here. There's just so much paperwork this evening.
That's why I was trying to find the page I was thinking of.
Yeah, yes, that would be great, because I was already.
Okay, so it looks like it's page 21, and there is an order, and
Yes. And actually, there's not an amount in the order anyway.
Liz, what do we need to be careful of here?
So you see that I just lost my page. There we go. Oh gosh. Okay, so I believe he's just, oh, I'm sorry, you're just appropriating the 13,437.50 for administrative expense.
For admin, right.
Correct.
Sorry, yeah. Originally, okay. So in the top, the wording is fine in the top, but there should be the amount in there. You know, you should read the amount with that wording. That's the Community Preservation Committee recommends the following amounts be appropriated or reserve. Well, I would just say be appropriated from fiscal year CPA fund revenue unless otherwise specified. for the 23 community preservation purposes, with each item considered a separate, see each item a separate appropriation.
Right.
All
right.
I would just say you're appropriating the admin unless they want an appropriation this coming year for those other amounts, open space, historic resources, and community housing. Christian, is that what is that what you want?
Yeah, the IGR that we've been basing this off of, this is the exact template is what I used. That's in the IGR, which includes the council voting on the reserves. So that's what I
They
copied.
can vote on a reserve is different from an appropriation.
Mm.
This is where I get the language is just a little different. So voting the reserves, I'm fine with. Just make the distinction between what you're appropriating and the reserves.
Yeah, the order itself, it looks like it does distinguish that, the one that the clerk's office drew up. It says appropriate for the administrative funds, and then the rest are.
Oh, I didn't see that. Is that at the beginning?
I think it is. I have it printed out.
Okay, sorry, I went to the. Sorry. Let me look what they did. They did. Sorry, I'm so sorry.
That's
That
okay.
looks fine.
Nope.
That looks fine.
This is quite an evening.
It
is quite an evening. Okay, so I think we have to read this. Do we have to read this?
Yes.
Or this is just, yes, we do have to read this.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and say order number fiscal year 22-158. The city council moved that it be ordered that the Greenfield City Council appropriate or reserve from Community Preservation Fund annual revenues or available funds the amounts recommended by the Community Preservation Committee for committee administrative expenses, debt service, community preservation projects, and other expenses in fiscal year 2023, with each item to be considered a separate appropriation as follows. Appropriate $13,437.50 from fiscal year 2023 Community Preservation Fund reserves for administrative expenses. Reserve $174,687.50 from fiscal year 023 Community Preservation Fund revenues for fiscal year 023 Community Preservation Fund purposes. Fiscal year 023 annual budgeted reserve. Reserve $26,875 from fiscal year 2023 Community Preservation Fund reserve for open space. Reserve $26,875 from fiscal year 2023 Community Preservation Fund reserves for historic resources. And reserve $26,875 from fiscal year 2023 Community Preservation Fund revenues for community housing. A majority vote is required. So I'd like the committee to weigh in on this particular motion, and we'll send it along with our recommendation. All those in favor of this project and this motion, please indicate by raising your hands, saying aye.
Aye.
Ginny, do I have you?
Yes, I said aye. And then
Okay.
after I'm voting, I have a question after this.
Okay.
For
All right.
Tom.
So that's going to be a unanimous positive recommendation of the committee out to council floor. Councilor Jasorga.
So Tom or Christian, when you were having the discussion, because I remember reviewing this law when we were looking at it. When you had your meetings and you were talking about the allotment of, how you were going to divide the, whatever it was that we gained through this community preservation. Oh, shoot, the agenda just went away.
I know.
Did any discussion come up about spending more towards housing? That was what I basically wanted to know. Because I know that a certain percentage of it had to be for housing. Did that, I just was curious before we moved on to the next thing.
With the chair's permission, And
Please, go ahead.
Christian will correct me if I'm wrong. We really did take what the guidelines for that came out for each of the sections for this first year, at the various percentages as recommended, then having some go into reserve. As time goes on, there certainly can be more be put in, or transfers could be made from the reserve or other areas that from time to time as it's deemed necessary. Or if there's a large project, not just for housing, but for some of the others, certainly the CPC, through the approval of council and the mayor, have the ability to bond future years as well if there was something of substance that went in. But we basically, I think, followed the guidelines that were provided by the state, the statewide agency advocacy group that works for that. Is that correct, Christian, for the most part?
Yeah, so for the three categories, the committee decided to do the 10% for each, which is the minimum, and then there's the annual reserve, which can be spent at any of those categories. So even if you had a project for housing that was more than the 10% that's been voted for this year, you could dip into that general reserve to fund that project as well.
Councilor DeSorga, does that answer your question?
That's fine. I was just curious how the discussion went. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to our next item on the agenda, which is fiscal year 22-141. The City Council, upon recommendation of Mayor Rita Gardner, and order to approve payment of a prior year invoice in the amount of $10,814, ordered that the Greenfield City Council approve the payment of prior year invoices for Simons Inc. in the amount of $10,814 to be paid from fiscal year 22 energy department budget. This is because it is prior year bill. We need a 9/10 vote, so we need 12 in the affirmative for this to pass on council floor. We also have attached to this, we have the invoice from Siemens, and we do have a memo from Director Collins. I'm going to say these are, oh boy. These are not my favorite, and particularly in the case of how Director Collins explained this to us, there was a lot going back and forth because this was actually a fiscal year 20 invoice. So this is now 2 years old. And I do understand that we are contractually obligated to pay for this bill. It's ours, we own it. Still, I know something always falls through the cracks and everything else, but my comment is that I will certainly be voting for it because it is a necessity for us to honor our debt. I just don't know how other councilors are going to feel about it, so I'll open up the floor. And I see Liz has got her hand up. So Liz, if you want to start us off in a conversation.
Yeah, I'll start you off in that I just want to make it known that this contractor owed us paperwork that Director Collins was not going to pay the invoice till they gave us the paperwork, the city, the paperwork. So
Okay.
that's how long it took to get the paperwork from this
Okay.
contractor. And they're reports that Director Collins needs very much.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Okay.
No, it sounds like we owe that, and I will vote in the affirmative. If they didn't submit the paperwork, I'm glad that she didn't. I'm glad that we didn't pay a bill without
Right.
getting the paperwork. So I agree with Director Collins on that. So I vote yes. I'll vote yes.
Okay. Counselor Healy, did you want to say anything?
No, I think it's pretty clear we own the money, and now the reason has been explained. I'm good.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, it passed. The motion passes. All right, now. Okay, we've got some end of year adjustments. We did receive some paperwork. We received some paperwork, I think, even before our annual meeting in regards to some of the shortages that were going to happen. I do want to say that I will read this list out. I do want to say that it is normal that this kind of thing happens at the end of a fiscal year. And we, the Department of Revenue does not allow us to close a negative balance. So it's a lot more flexible than it used to be 20 years ago. I appreciate the fact that we need to close to a zero bottom line so that this doesn't get raised on our taxes. I'll read the order. It's fiscal year 22-149. The City Council, upon recommendation of Mayor Rita Gardner and in accordance with Mass General Laws, fiscal year 22 end of year transfer request. Move that it be ordered that the sum of $50,000 be transferred from the following fiscal year 22 accounts. 01001500.5305 labor special litigation 40 grand. 01002410.5111 building salaries $10,000 to the following account. 01001510.5302 fiscal year 22 city legal 50,000. Explanation, there is a balance in labor special litigation of $60,005 and the balance in the building inspector salary 43,247. Majority vote is required. There is an explanation of supporting rationale. The mayor can post a future executive session upon request to go over all the details of the city legal costs. To prevent a deficit being added to the fiscal year 23 levy, the city is requesting this transfer. 2 more months of invoices are to be paid for fiscal year 22. The majority of this transfer request is coming from another legal account. I'll open it up for discussion.
Councilor Forgy.
Yes, go ahead, Councilor DeSorda.
So I have 2-part comments. So one is on the departments that had expenses that were over, like we got an expense over, for example, on dispatch, but we could see that the entire budget was going to be over. I think they were $125,000 in overtime. So obviously we saw the entire budget on Munis, what was over. My first part of my comment is when we're looking at, say, the fire department fuel, if they are short on fuel, which of course, I think we all go to the pump. So everybody knows that gas has gone up. It's huge, the expense of gas right now. But the rest of their budget, the rest of their entire budget, like if you had a $2 million budget and you're over on fuel, but you're under on something else. I guess what I'm saying is maybe as it gets to the end of the year for next year, we would be looking at, was that department almost over? Because couldn't they take it from another part of their budget? This is for you, Councilor Forgy, if you know. If you were in the fire department and you were, say, $20,000 short on fuel, but you had $20,000 left on, I don't know, equipment that you didn't spend. So I think to do our job adequately on Ways and Means, I'd like to see as it gets to the end of the year, for next year, not now, because I think everybody, I asked Liz to get something to us today, not knowing that today was payroll. And again, I thanked her on email, but I'm going to say it again on live television. Thank you for getting that to us today. But, you know, I'd like to know how, I think that's one piece that we miss looking at in Ways and Means, was we appropriate all the money, and in the end, we don't really quite see where it all went. You know what I'm saying? Do you get the drift of what I'm saying?
If I could respond, it's been my experience that if you're working within a department and you're 20 under on one line item and you're 20 over on the other line item, you will zero. And that's you go bottom line. You go all the way to the bottom line. What I am suspecting here, and I hope Liz can back me up on this, but what I'm suspecting here is that the expenditure line items that we just read and talked about, that the money is coming from, for instance, we're looking at building salaries. Well, we know that there was money allocated for someone to come into the building inspections department, and that money was not used. They were not able to hire somebody. And yet they're over in the city legal account. So basically the mayor is making a decision about where to take that money from bottom line and put it into, I think when you have money that is transferring into, for instance, city legal, they're asking for $50,000 to go into city legal. It's basically because they're going to be short in city legal. Yeah. And so I hope that's the explanation. Is that what you were looking for, Councilor DeSorga?
Yes. Well, that was a great explanation. And so in the end, I think maybe I just, you all know what I'm like. I look at everything. So I guess maybe I drive everybody crazy because I check all the numbers and add them up. I even do them on the calculator. So I'd like to see, I know Liz is our local expert on that, and thank you to her. So just to see where these ones that needed extra, where the whole thing was, maybe we should look at it in August. But my second point that I wanted to make was I'm going to vote in favor of the transfers, just so everybody knows that. But I don't think we should be saying in any one department that we don't have enough money in gas when we're going to vote enough money in gas. Because I think it's important to tell the truth. So the fire department's not going to say that they don't have enough money in the fire department budget to drive to fires. And I don't think anybody else should be saying, in my humble opinion, that we don't have enough gas to drive people if we're going to drive anywhere, if we're going to put the gas into the funds. I think it's important honesty.
Okay, thank you. We do have those fuel items coming up on another motion. So that would be a good time to discuss. Councilor Keeley.
Yeah, I just had a question. Now these totals that we're transferring, is that money already allocated to pay an expense, or are we assuming that's what the total expense is going to cost through June?
I'm going to ask Liz if she would go ahead and speak to that.
So are you speaking of where the money's coming from?
No,
okay.
Two. So if we already overran something like fuel by 18,000, is that like, are we going to overrun it again, or is that kind of a conservative?
No. So that's kind of the issue when this is end of the year, and I have, because of 5-day rules, I'm projecting out 2 months, But I ran updated reports on this, and I think you can see that police and fire are definitely getting worse. And I did send updated fire and overall fire and police budgets and DPW, so you could see the bottom lines. But again, it's not the end of the year yet. So you could, and I'm not suggesting this because you would have to call a special council meeting in July. And I was trying to avoid that. You could wait, but even at that, bills lag several months over the course of the summer. So you're doing your best. And I worked with the fire chief, the police chief, everyone went through their budget saying, where are you going to end up? And do you need this additional funds for fuel? The only one that's really in my mind that's even questionable of where the finish is Public Works, but there's so many aspects to Public Works that you just don't know how they're going to end up the year. But it's clear that police and fire clearly need it.
Mhm.
I mean,
Okay.
they're just bottom line deficit, both.
Right.
Okay.
So,
And as we transfer these funds, if we overrun that, then we have to allocate money in the next budget, more money. How does that work?
So the two budgets don't speak to each other, but what happens is we have to add that to the tax levy for next year.
Okay.
They make us record that and put it on the tax recap, and then certain deficits they'll actually deduct from our free cash too.
Okay.
So that's why I'm doing my best not to have any deficits. But you are right that I think we all know that fuel is going to be an issue in 23 because it doesn't seem like it's going down.
Mhm.
And so we are going to have to think about that of how we're going to address it in 23 for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. No more questions.
And we have about 300,000 or so left in free cash. Is that correct? Liz, about 300,
209,000 because we just voted 50 for compensated absences and 50 toward 23's budget. So it's down to 209.
Oh, wow.
And that goes away as of June 30th. So you'll have to wait for next year to get recertified.
Okay, got it.
Yep. Okay.
209.
Okay, so I'd like to just take a vote on this for a recommendation out to council floor. All in favor of this motion indicate aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstentions? Okay. It's positive unanimous going out to council floor. Our next item, a fiscal year 22-150, the city council upon recommendation of Mayor Rita Gardner and in accordance with Mass General Law, fiscal year 22 end of year transfer request. Move that it be ordered that the sum of 30,000 be transferred from fiscal year 22 line item 01002120.5111 parking salaries to fiscal year 01002130.5130 dispatch overtime. The balance in parking salaries is $35,201. This is a majority vote. The explanation is dispatch overtime has a deficit of $92,322 due to staffing issues. The city is anticipating the majority, if not all of the deficit to come from 911 funding, but as a precaution to prevent a deficit is requesting a buffer from the parking salary account. People have any questions or concerns that they'd like to discuss?
I could see how much over that was. I'm okay with that one.
Okay.
And they, you know, I looked at their whole budget. I'm in
Okay.
favor.
All right. If we're ready to move on, all those in favor, making that
Aye.
transfer? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, we're good. Positive unanimous recommendation out to council. Next item, order number fiscal year 22-151. The city council upon recommendation of Mayor Rita Gardner and in accordance with Mass General Law, fiscal year 22 end of year energy transfer requests moved that it be ordered that the sum of $60,000 be transferred from the following accounts: 01001550.5111 fiscal year IT salaries, 42,000. 01001350.5111 fiscal year 22 accounting salaries, $18,000. to the following fiscal year energy accounts: 0100-1970.521122 fire electric, 0100-1970.52162 fire propane, and 0100-1970.521111 middle school electric, 21,000. Fiscal year 22 IT base salary balance was 42,581. Fiscal year 22 accounting salary balance was 27,786. Majority vote is required. Explanation of supporting rationale. The temporary fire station accounts for the overage in the fire accounts. Middle school electric rebate expired during fiscal year 22. 2 more months of invoices are still to be paid. Fiscal year salary line items being utilized were both reduced in the fiscal year 23 budget. Okay, we have some backup paperwork to that effect. Anybody wish to discuss or have any questions?
All right.
Yeah, I know. It's
Don't
okay.
you wish my hand would like disappear, Chris?
Okay, no,
Did you
it's
ever wish my
perfectly
hand
fine.
would disappear? You know, I have a question for Liz. Does every city do this? Does every city take a ton of their budget and put their energy with the energy department as opposed to with their department budget? Do you know that? You must have done other cities.
Yes. I think the goal of establishing this was to obtain the best contracts for the city.
Okay.
So that's why Carol, Director Collins, department was created.
Okay.
So that Carol goes out and negotiates all these contracts, and obviously the more you have in to be able to negotiate, the more volume, I mean, the better you get on your contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And as well as, you know, going forward with green initiatives, it's Director Collins who works on those and needs to make sure we obtain the credits or rebates that the city is supposed to receive. So that's why it was done. Because I sort of like central maintenance for buildings. It was the same concept. Also with copiers though, or wrong one, but central services as well. There's many things like copiers. So the idea is to increase your negotiating power by having everything put out at once, whether it's copiers, whether it's energy, whether it's building maintenance contracts. That's why central services, central maintenance, and energy were established. Sorry, I went on.
No, you know, it's something that, follow up if I may, Councilor 4G, I'm sorry for just.
Go ahead, Jen.
It's something that you don't understand when you first, like even the first year that you're doing this, it's like it doesn't come under that department's budget. So just to go over this for next year, I'm looking in my budget book. Did we budget enough for this temporary fire station? Not that that's the question
So there was an issue with the quarters. I'm not, probably either the chief would be a better one or maybe even the mayor, but they had to use more propane to preserve the equipment. So they had no choice. And the fire chief told me it was really a defect in the the tents themselves. And so they're going after the vendor to say, hey, you got to do something about this for the city. So they're trying to get some free months out of the tent rental. So hopefully that will happen. But it wasn't anticipated. It really wasn't that it was going to be that high at all.
Mayor, you have your hand up quickly.
I do. Just confirming what Liz said. The big surprise was, and it's not the only issue we've had with the supplier of the apparatus bays for the temporary. So there was an issue that caused the need to use more propane in order to protect all the equipment in the apparatus bay. If you've been in one, you see it doesn't just house trucks, it houses a whole lot of other things, including the trucks, which can be very sensitive too. So we needed to use a lot of propane. And Carol is being extremely diligent, as is the chief, in ensuring that we get some of that money back, but we don't have it now, so we need it now.
Mhm.
Thank you. Any comments? Okay, then we'll move along on taking a vote for a recommendation. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Off we go. Fiscal year 22-152, the City Council, upon recommendation of Mayor Rita Gardner and in accordance with Mass General Law, fiscal year 22 end of year transfer requests, move that it be ordered that the sum of $12,600 be transferred from account 0100-1410.5111 assessor's salaries and wages to the following fiscal year general fund accounts: 0100-9160.5181 Medicare tax $10,000, 0100-1580.5317 tax title $2,600. Balance in the assessor's salaries is $25,953. A majority vote is required. The explanation is union contracts, both school and town, resulted in higher salaries as well as retro payments, which affect Medicare tax. The school also has balloon salary payments in June that will put the Medicare tax over the budget. Tax title increase is due to tax title liens placed. It is difficult to predict the number of liens. 2 more months of invoices are to be paid. Number 3, balance available in the assessor's salary and wage line is due to an extended vacancy. Any discussion? Rather straightforward. Okay, I don't see any hands up, so I'm going to move along. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Positive recommendation. Unanimous. Coming out. Next order, fiscal year 22-153, the City Council, upon recommendation of Mayor Rita Gardner and in accordance with Mass General Law, fiscal year 22 reserve fund transfer request, move that it be ordered that the sum of $65,000 be transferred from fiscal year 22 0100-1320.7.5781 reserve fund to fiscal year 22 city vehicle fuel accounts as follows: 0100-2100.5482 police no lead gas $25,000, 0100-2200.5482 fire fuel $20,000, 0100-4290-5482 DPW service gas $10,000, and 0100-4290-5483 DPW service diesel $10,000. Reserve fund balance is $65,000. One prior transfer of $10,000 to DPW flooded the swimming pool area last summer. $75,000 appropriation, less the 10 grand. Majority vote required. Explanation: the level of fuel escalation this spring was not anticipated. Departments have tried to cover this increase within their budgets, but the increase has been too large This will be needed in fiscal year 23 as well, as fuel prices do not come down. Munis report is attached. There are 2 more months of charges remaining to be paid. Any discussion?
So, Councilor Forgy, so this was my little place for discussion about telling the truth. And I think that I'm inclined to vote for this. I think that departments need to be told to tell the truth, that we're giving them gas money so that they can drive places. And I want to see if anybody else thinks the same as I do. That's what I'm having to say.
So I'm not clear. Can you elaborate a little more, please, Councilor
Yes,
DeSorgo?
yes. The police department was saying they didn't have enough money for fuel to drive to places, and we're actually budgeting for it. And I'm happy to give anybody the budget in gas because it's needed, but we need to tell the truth that they have enough money for gas. So,
Well, okay.
They're saying currently there's no money for gas, and I thought, well, people are saying there's no money for gas. We're voting on the money for gas, and it's important to me not to misrepresent how we're spending any money.
Okay, thank you.
Because the fire department's also short on gas, and they're not telling people they can't drive to their houses if they're on fire.
Okay, thank you. I just want to say that this is a fiscal year, end of fiscal year transfer. And I just want people to understand that this is the amount of money that everybody says that they need to get through the end of this fiscal year. It's not going to be allocated to go into the next budget. It's going to close to general fund if it actually is not spent. And the other piece, I'm just going to thank you for your comments. Thank you. Okay. If there are no more comments, can we take a vote on this, please? Okay. This is for, okay, we've already read out the motion. I'm sorry, I lost my place. So this is a reserve fund transfer purposes of fuel for police, fire, and DPW. All in favor? Aye.
Reluctantly, aye.
Okay. Thank you. Any opposed, any abstentions? Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next one. Fiscal year 22, 154. The City Council, upon recommendation of Mayor Rita Gardner and in accordance with Mass General Law, fiscal year 22 end of year transfer request, move that it be ordered that the sum of $61,000 be transferred from the fiscal year 22 0100 7100 59991 short-term principal paydown to fiscal year 22 0100 7520 5925 short-term interest. Balance in short-term principal paydown is $120,000. Majority vote required. And the explanation is more capital projects with bans were further underway than anticipated during the budget process. Is there any discussion for this? Okay, I don't hear any discussion. I would move that we take a vote. All those in favor of this transfer, please indicate. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Any abstentions? We're good. Okay. That can't be all our, yes, it is.
It is.
Look at you.
Yes, it is. It's great. Wow. All right, thank you. We've got all our business that we needed to get done for our council meeting on Wednesday night. Next part of our agenda is public comment. Is there anybody out there that would like to speak? Okay, we're moving along. All right, now we move into our discussion. We have a number of items on our agenda. I do want to be able to move along on these, and let's see how we can break these items up and what we need to follow through on them. The first one is financial activity involving the one property located on 294, 296, 298 Federal Street. Anybody want to comment or talk about this? Okay, Councilor DeSorga?
We have a special tax agreement that so I have two parts of this. We have a special tax
Sure.
agreement that was signed before any of us got to be counselors in December of, well, I think it was 2019, but it's December of something, just before we took office. And since that happened, things changed, and that was not all. I'm sure everybody saw the audit report. That wasn't cleaned up properly. So when that was signed, it was different than what is the facts now. And I think that that's something that should be looked at. That is a very significant tax break. And my second part of that, and I already wrote to the mayor, and thank you for being on this meeting, Mayor, was I actually have concerns, which I think this will probably go on to our meeting tomorrow night, but with continuing to have the same person doing this, I worry about the financial implications of that. That really is a decision. It sounds like that's going to be up to the mayor, but we're on the Ways and Means part, and I worry if we have the same people doing the same job, that it might not work out well. But I'm particularly concerned about that tax assessment, and I think that there are, what are the ramifications for us as Ways and Means members looking at that? That's ginormous, which I don't think that's a real word. And the special tax assessment that they were given, or that special tax break, had to do with the fact that they were going to clean up the property, and it's not clean. That's all.
Okay. Okay. Is this something that you want to see this committee talk about with, for instance, the assessing department with our new assessor? Is that something that I really do want to invite our new assessor to come to Ways and Means to just meet us and give us a little bit of his philosophy and everything else. But if we have specific questions like that for him at that time, would that be a venue that you might be interested in having in which we can pursue some of these questions? Councilor DeSorga.
That's fine with me. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on it, but I would think that would need to be renegotiated because things changed. I don't know what anyone else thinks.
I do have a question.
Okay, Councilor Healy, thank you.
With the STA, special tax agreement, I haven't read it. I don't know if I have a copy in my inbox somewhere, but typically when an STA is written, there's some legal language. It's a legal document, right? And there's some language in there that states termination for cancellation or items that would, discredit the STA if you don't follow certain guidelines, if you don't hire enough people, etc. Has anybody looked into the legality of the STA in regards to the site cleanup? Excuse me.
I did.
Councilor DeSorga.
I did. There were terms in there about the cleanup. So that's why I think the numbers has to be different. There was also terms in there about the number of employees. Mind you, none of this has started yet. because we have not actually, they have not purchased that property from the town. So it was something that was negotiated in good faith. And I actually believe on following up on anything that where we negotiate in good faith. But it definitely changed dramatically. So for the city as a whole to be holding that agreement does not seem appropriate now. I get the reason for TIFs, and this is our only STA, but special tax assessment, but it was negotiated as are done. They are all done before the things actually change hands or before it actually begins. But this is one where it's just so different from what it is because they didn't finish the cleanup.
So should we have our legal department look into it and see if there's any grounds for further clarification? I mean, we're not lawyers, right? We're far from it. And I try to understand law, but every time I try to, I miss something, right? So I think we need to have our legal team look at this. We need to look at ways to sit down with the client who's going to receive the STA and say, in good faith, we offered this to you. You said in our last meeting that if there was discrepancies found in the audit, you would clean it up. He said it in public comment, the owner, and I think we have to hold him accountable for that as well. So.
Okay. The mayor has her hand up. Mayor, did you want to comment?
Oh, okay, good. With a little delay on my unmute. Sorry about that. Councilor DeSorger is correct. None of this has gone into play at this moment in time because they don't own the building yet. And that process of purchasing the building has been stalled. But in reading the STA, there's nothing in it that talks about a cleanup process as a responsible issue that I could see. But I need to probably review it more carefully. But the point of it is the audit is there to allow them the opportunity to continue to clean it up. And I think if you were to inquire of John Ziegler from Mass DEP, he would tell you exactly that. So it's not a process of they didn't clean it up. It's a process of we now have an audit that says these are additional things that need to be done. That is the way the process with DEP works. So it remains to be seen whether they didn't clean it up. But I think this is a little premature to bring up the STA when in fact it hasn't been, we're not through with even this particular aspect of the process of cleaning up the building. They have additional marching orders, if you will, from DEP that says these are the things that need to happen. So I think we need to, as a city and as a council, need to allow that process to take place before we even find out whether a purchase of the building will take place and whether an STA will go into place. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Forgy, for that, allowing me to say that.
Okay. So I'm going to, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to recommend this evening, it's okay with the other members of Ways and Means, that we bring this forward as an agenda item on our next, for our July meeting. I think that that's an appropriate thing to do. And in the meantime, it'll give us an opportunity to dig in a little more and see what we can come up with. There's some, I think there is some appropriateness in us being involved to understand the ways in which the financial activity on this site has happened and how it will change and go forward from this point on. So if that's okay with the other members of the committee, I'm going to move that back out to the July. Okay. All right, we're going to move on to report on the acceptance and distribution of grant money. I'm going to take the next three together because I think they're related to each other. Also, understanding departmental budgets that include a listing of a specific number of employees in each department. Grant funding as applied to departmental budgets. So I'm going to stop right there, those three pieces. One of the things that we had talked about as a Ways and Means Committee, or at least it was mentioned in Ways and Means, is that it seems to be a good idea that we take an opportunity at some point to review our Greenfield budget process, almost like, I don't want to say use the words post-mortem, but yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And look to next year, look to the future to figure out how we can make this process better than it was this year, and how we can get more information to streamline the process. So if this is okay, I want to say that the report on acceptance and distribution of grant money, I don't know if there's any kind of reporting capacity that is automatic. Liz, you may know this. I don't know if there's reports that come up in Munis, if it has to be created manually. All of the, the understanding of all of these things as well. Some of this information we did have to dig for during our budget, especially the number of people that were in departments and stuff like that. And so we're just hoping that we can take a list of all these things that we think might work better in getting them ready, getting prepared for next year's budget, to get them in the form of reports. They could be quarterly, they could be a half-year report, or they could just be the one piece of information that we're all looking for to get into the budget. So I'm going to ask Liz first. What's possible as we go down this list as far as what can come off a system that currently exists right now?
So I'm going to just speak to the grants first.
Okay.
That, I believe it or not, we have worked on processes to improve that because it wasn't in the best format. As I've always said, garbage in, garbage out. If you know what you want to pull out of a system, you have to code it a certain way, and we have to code it a certain way. Also, keep in mind for the Department of Revenue, they have certain codes that they want utilized for, particularly they want federal grants coded one way, they want state grants coded another way. So depending on the source of the funding, they want it accounted for differently. So I've worked hard on, since I've been here, to create distinctive federal and state to pull that information. So on the newer things, I can pull that. What I need, what we're working on with departments and hard, we will not set up a grant until we have all the paperwork, so that we know the budget, so that we know the source of it, whether it's federal or state or private. So when that information is in, yes, it's easy to pull. It's getting people accustomed to that process of giving us that information. And it is important. Chris, you remember at one of the meetings you held up the Mass General Law book to say, yes, that's what you need now?
Would you like me to find it?
This is federal grant compliance.
Oh, lovely. Okay.
And it is just this thick. So there's a lot to grants. It isn't as easy as just pay for this. Federal grants, right, you can't supplant. There's a lot to federal grants.
Right.
So compliance is an issue, but I think that at the time, I was trying, whether it's quarterly and we just say these are new grants we received the last quarter. I don't know. Throw it out for discussion. I'm thinking it's something like that. I know the mayor has been working on getting that from folks. And you know, I even pulled the schools department's grant. Mayor can tell you that. I pull the schools to see where they're at, because it also impacts the city if they are not managing it well.
Right.
Because if they don't request the funds, it actually can hurt the city on their free cash certification.
Right.
So anyway, there's a lot to it. There's a lot to understand. I think a starting point is getting a report that's perhaps quarterly or whatever you want on the grants the city has received. We're going to catch you up with a report, but then getting it quarterly to say these are new ones and this is the amount and this is what it's for, basically. And I think that would help the interrelation between budgets. Again, that's where you have to understand federal grants and even state. Often a lot of state grants are actually federal flow through grants. You have something that's called time and effort, so you can't just supplant someone's time. You can't say, oh, I have this grant for this, I'm going to pay you out of here. No, that's called supplanting. Even with, I'm going to use the example of community development. They have to fill out their time and certify that they spent so much time working on community development block grant versus economic development or something else. They have to literally certify that. So you have to have that level of understanding to know what you can put on the grant and what you cannot put on the grant. So it's a little more involved in that. And some grants that we've all received have a little more flexibility, but that's only recently with COVID grants and ARPA grants. There's an ESSER for the school. They have more flexibility. In general, grants don't quite have that much flexibility. And what you can do with them, great person to have is Director Adams on, because she will tell you with CDBG, you also get into it's not the power, what is it? It's
Economic opportunity zones.
Yes, thank you. And so that gets involved on what you can use those, where you can use those funds geographically. So, you know, there's a lot to the grants, but I think that I think you'll like the report that the mayor's gathering right now to catch us up. But I think you'll be surprised both at the dollars of the school grants and the dollars that the city receives.
Thank you, Liz.
Yep.
Councillor DeSorger?
Liz, thank you, and thank you for holding up the book.
Oh yeah, don't you love that book?
So my perspective is we get a stipend for this. It's $2,000 a year. I don't ever think that we're going to know or need to know, will know what you know. I am somebody that drives everybody nuts because I have a million questions. But what I want to know when we get to the bottom line voting on a budget was only a few things. So I don't want to make a lot of work for somebody, but there were some things like, well, we had like when we were paying for an audit, you know, I circle some things and drive you all crazy. But I do know that sometimes we may be auditing, we pay for an audit, there were specific things where I thought they tied into our budget. Does CDBG, and you have to tell me today, because
okay.
I could not vote for a couple of things on our budget because I wasn't aware last year, did they have a 0.4 person who was paid so much out of a budget and then a whole person this year. and I actually am on disability access and volunteered over in economic development one year. And I understand like certain parts of that. And I don't think we all need, God knows, we don't need to know what you know, but we do need to know where it intersects with what we have to vote on. Like, does any, and like that's for next year, does any part of the housing, like the housing authority, did they look at, I forget when we did our audit, but if we look at how things are going in the housing authority, do they contribute to part of it? Because I don't want to vote $60,000 out of the general fund if we get 5,000 from here and 5,000 from here. So for next year, this is like the postmortem for next year, just if it does intersect with a grant fund, I personally would like to know, or I'll be back at you with those nauseating, having my hand up again.
So just to talk about the audit again, is that the only one that may pay for it, maybe, and it's a small amount, is CDBG, and that's dependent on the funding. So I still have to pay the bill. If they can contribute it, great. But it's not, if they can, I still have to pay the bill. So that's the only one that pays.
Well,
everyone else is just comes back in indirects. So in other words, you budget the full amount and the water, sewer in indirect revenue pays for part of that. So it really isn't the audit itself. People, I think you're more on track with people versus things.
Okay. Okay. But CDBG funding does not come from that. Can I follow up with my question, Councilor Ford?
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
I didn't mean to have a back and forth with directly. So if CDBG fund isn't come from what we, it doesn't come from the tax base. That's a federal grant, so it isn't something that we wouldn't appropriate.
Some people argue that it ultimately did come from
Well, it
tax.
does, but it doesn't come from what we budget for in that calendar year.
We do not appropriate it, doesn't go on the recap.
So, and I saw on I saw something where they had contributed to the audit, and I'm like, okay, I would gladly pay for whatever it is that we owe. But the 0.4, I couldn't vote for economic development because I thought, I don't know what, and I love that we have them. It's great. And then the mayor said that information was available in Munis, and with all due respect, we don't have access to Munis. I would love the numbers of people to be right in our budget books.
First of all, there aren't, just to let you know, there aren't that many people who are split, okay?
Yes.
There just aren't. So the thing in that regard is that it's more a grant requirement, because they will say, you're not spending your entire time on CDBG. You need to show in the general fund that you are paying, you're supporting this person for the other work they do. So that's more of a grant requirement than the fact that we put 0.6 in the general fund. So honestly, I think it's working better on getting, and we'll work more with HR on this, I think, but I always think of people in terms of FTEs, and that's full-time equivalent. Whether they're half-time, a half-time is a 0.5 FTE. So if you have one full-time person, one FTE, their pay is funded by another source, then you show that by saying this much comes from here, this much comes from there. But honestly, there are not that many of them. But we can do that. It's more honestly on, I think you'd find more on the school side than on the city side. Just
okay, Mayor?
Yeah, just to further answer the question, particularly as it relates to CDBG and the economic development budget this year. But overall, Liz is correct. There, to my knowledge, and I'm going through the slow processor here, but the Economic Development Department, the Community and Economic Development Department, and the Council on Aging budget are the only ones that have grant-funded positions that are partially, salaries that are partially funded through the grants. In Community and Economic Development, it's MJ, it's Christian, and it's Lindsay. I think MJ does a very good job of making sure that that time is accounted for and that they work on what they're working on. And Lindsay is literally the full, I guess you would call her the FTE for CDBG. Christian's time is spent a little bit. And because MJ basically oversees the department, a certain portion of her salary is legitimately attached to CDBG. And that fluctuates a little bit. And she would, this year's request for FY23 was so that she could move herself more off of the CDBG budget and onto the general fund, which appropriately as an economic development director, she would belong. So that was the explanation for this year, and we can certainly revisit that again next year. As far as Council on Aging goes, this will be taxing my memory a little bit, but there are a couple of people in Hope's staff. I don't believe Hope puts her salary onto the formula grant, but there's something called the formula grant. That a certain portion of certain staff people's time is devoted to the formula grant. Again, so that we can have those people there so that they can do the work that they do. And we don't have to pay for them on the general fund. That's the good news. With respect to that, yeah, if there's a clearer way to state it, or if there's a better explanation for all counselors, we're happy to provide that. With regard to the reporting, I'm actually a little surprised myself when I've had Athena, who is again the part-time grant writer and manager. She's only been here since October, so she's been devoting most of her time to grant writing and hasn't solidified all the processes that she would need to do all of the grant management. And I don't know that she could do all of it, but she could do a good chunk of it. Every department applies for grants in one fashion or another. I would like to see us come to a place at some point where most of that is run through the grant manager at some point. So I asked her to come up with the list of grants, which again, I think would be best given to you folks. I'm sorry about Glenda's making her 2 cents worth known as well. Be giving to you folks on a quarterly basis, because once we get a grant, you'll notice when I finally get that list to you, when I say that, it's not going to be next year. It'll be hopefully by the end of the week. That you'll see that some of the grants are over 3 years or even longer. So we get a grant and it might go on and on for quite some time. But it is essential that we have them, because that's how we actually get really good work done for the city. So when I asked all department heads, Athena had a working list of grants. When I asked department heads to update it, I was really surprised at how many more additional grants we have. So I think you'll be pleased with the list that you see and the information that you get. I've asked them to give it to me by tomorrow morning, and I think we can do a pretty good job of getting it consolidated to have to you by the end of the week. Don't hold me to that though, because who knows what will happen. So with regard to that, and I don't know if there's other, somewhere in there was the understanding departmental budgets that include a listing of the specific number of employees in each department. I'm happy to, doesn't have to be tonight, have a discussion about what you mean exactly on that. In the narratives for each department, as a general rule, if I'm not mistaken, I didn't look at all of them, but there is a list, there is a number given for how many people are employed in that department. But if that number needs to be made clearer in the budget, again, happy to have that postmortem, and we'll come to some agreement on it.
Okay,
And
thank
I
you,
think
Mayor.
that's it. If anybody has any other questions that I can answer, and I'm sure Liz would be happy to do it too.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Councilor DeSorga.
Thank you all very much. I don't want to make a lot of trouble for anybody now, or that I needed anything by the end. I just meant for next year, if this was like the post-mortem was all, you did a great job. I said I loved the budget book. You did a fabulous job. We had all kinds of things in it just to try to save us for next year. Like under, like say the treasurer and collector, if it said, you know, like one FTE who was maybe the department head, and then 2 FTEs, if there were 2 different wage on line items, but I think there's 3 FTEs in the top line. I just read through a lot of other department budget books. Not that their budgets were better. They might have been much worse, when ours might have been the best. I'm not criticizing. Like I said, I loved it. But under the fire department, who knew that in the fire department what their administrative person were, whichever was the correct word, just fill that in the blanks for me because it's late. So if they have an administrator, I would like to know in the fire department, that's all I want to know for next year, that we know that there's 0.8 administration in the fire department, and maybe that there's 1 chief, and or even just salary. There are 28 firefighters and 1 chief or whatever. If there is something, and from that, if it's coming from a different source, like under community and economic development, I still don't know, and it's fine. We voted for it because it's a majority, and I believe in democracy and in the will of the group. For next year, for economic development, if we have 1 person in economic development, and it's 1 who's we're paying for, you know, like we're taxing for, that's 1 FTE. And then we could have that we're paying for that comes out of salary and wage items. And then I would want to know 0.4, was it last year? 0.4 came out of the city budget, you know, and 0.6 of that person's pay came out of CDBG. I just don't want you to think that I'm asking you to explain all of the grant funding, because it's a book that's this fat, and that's, I'm trying to make my fingers show on the screen, that it's this fat. And then your other grant books, that's federal funding. There's probably other state grants, and their books are this fat. I'm not asking you to do that. That would not be reasonable. What I wanted to know was, if we are taxing people for this many people, we should know that. Do you get what I mean? And thank you for all you're doing. That's all.
Right. I think the point is, if employees are getting paid out of the general fund, we need to know that. And if they're employees getting paid out of other sources, that's important for us to know too. Does that sum it up?
Yeah. And administrator, if we have in a big department and you have administrators, like in other books, it showed like a fire department had an administrator. Well, that's part of I'd like to know that. That's all. And thank you for everything. I'm done with my postmortem.
Okay, so I am going to beg everybody's indulgence right now. It is 8:30. We did get started late. My apologies for that. I'd just like to say, let's move on till we can readdress some of these other issues under discussion. There is no other business that I'm aware of. Does anybody have any business they want to bring out to us? Okay. Our next meeting is July 19th, 2022 at 6 p.m. It says Johnson Community Center, Zoom hybrid, unless otherwise posted. So it appears to be an in-person meeting for the subcommittee.
And we hope it all works.
And we certainly hope something works. Okay, thank you. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So move, Ms. Walker.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, meeting is
Thank you.
adjourned at 8:32 p.m. Thank you all very much.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Really appreciate
you.
it. And we'll see you again, and hopefully it'll be smoother next time.